world where violence, war, and political unrest lurk in many corners, safety is no longer a given. It's a privilege. From children born to the sound of gunfire in Gaza, to the elderly forced to flee their homeland in Sudan, we see clearly that peace always comes at a cost. But somewhere out there are still countries where people can put down their phones, stop worrying, and feel hopeful about tomorrow. In 2025, after surveys from the Global Peace Index Numbeo and my own experience living abroad, I want to share with you the top 10 safest countries in the world, places where you can live, study, or simply breathe in peace. 10. Portugal. Safety doesn't come from the law, but from the way of life. Portugal doesn't need to shout that it's a safe country. They don't need a massive police force or cameras on every street corner to prove it. Because here, safety isn't enforced from above. It comes from within people themselves. I once walked alone late at night in Porto, through ancient cobblestone streets, silent in the dark. And the only thing that made me uneasy was my phone battery hitting 1%. There was no sense of being followed, no suspicious glances, no sounds to make your heart race. And that's a feeling you rarely find in today's world, where fear is sometimes the shared language. In Portugal, people don't act kindly because they fear punishment, but because it's simply the right thing to do. They might argue about politics, complain about taxes, or be unhappy with the government, but they'll still let you cross the street, hold the door open, and wish you a good day as you leave a cafe. This isn't the richest country in Europe, but that's why I was even more amazed at how civility and humanity seem to radiate everywhere. It made me wonder, does economic wealth sometimes drain us of compassion? Crime rates in Portugal are so low that it's no longer considered a hot topic on the daily news, especially for tourists. You can stroll, explore back alleys in Lisbon or coastal fishing villages without being overly cautious. In fact, many foreigners who were once victims of instability in their own countries have chosen Portugal as a long-term haven. Portugal doesn't just attract them with warm sunshine and cheap wine, but because it gives them back something that feels like a luxury, the sense of being safe, being themselves, and not having to be on guard with every gaze. Their public healthcare system, though not as fancy as Switzerland's, is good enough that an immigrant won't go bankrupt over a single emergency. Cities like Coimbra, Faro, or Braga even offer surprisingly low living costs, while still providing a higher quality of life than the European average. That's why thousands of retirees from the US, France, and Canada have quietly chosen Portugal as their final life paradise, a place where they don't have to spend their entire savings just to feel secure. I think Portugal teaches us something important. True safety isn't something you build with steel and laws. It's about how people treat each other, social trust. And when humans respect one another not out of fear but empathy. And in a world where trust is becoming a luxury item, Portugal is precious, not because it's perfect, but because it still holds on to what so many places have lost: humanity. 9. Singapore. Safety programmed like an operating system. If Portugal is safe because people live with heart, then Singapore is where you feel safe because society runs like a Swiss watch, precise, efficient, and unforgiving of any deviation. Here, everything is designed to minimize risk. From platform screen doors in the subway to a dense network of surveillance cameras covering every street corner. But the strange thing is, you don't feel controlled. You feel protected. Safety doesn't come from the feeling of being watched, but from the awareness that any misbehavior will be detected and addressed immediately. This isn't a place for lovers of American-style freedom, but it's paradise for those who value order and efficiency. I once stayed in Singapore on a long business trip, and what stuck with me wasn't Marina Bay Sands or Sentosa, but the time I dropped my wallet in Bugis at 11 p.m., I came back almost an hour later, and it was still there, untouched. A security guard told me, "No one takes it here, no one dares to, and no one needs to." That might sound simple, but it perfectly reflects the core of Singapore. A nation where safety is the result of wealth, discipline, and laws so strict that deviation is nearly impossible. Singapore operates like a closed operating system. Do things right, and you're supported, protected, and get to enjoy the experience. Do things wrong, and the system responds as swiftly as a software update. The government doesn't just pass laws, they enforce them, and they do it decisively. Because of this, crime barely exists in the traditional sense: mugging, theft, public disorder. These feel like old fairy tales you only read about. Even small acts like chewing gum in public or littering can result in heavy fines. But it's this strictness that's built a society where women can walk home alone at midnight without fear, where kids go to school alone, and where you can leave your laptop on a cafe table and step outside to take a call without a second thought. However, safety in Singapore isn't for everyone. It comes with a price. It's a trade-off. You give up some personal freedom in exchange for absolute stability. This isn't the place for rule breakers or spontaneous souls. Everything here follows a rule, from how you walk to how you interact. But to me, Singapore isn't an invisible prison, as some critics say. It's like an optimized operating system where you're the user. And if you follow the process, you'll get a smooth, glitch-free, danger-free experience. One last thing I want to say. Singapore doesn't give you the freedom to do what you want, but it gives you freedom from worrying about danger. In an age where people are increasingly insecure, both materially and emotionally, maybe this is the kind of freedom people are craving. A quiet, stable freedom that doesn't require constant effort just to survive. And that's why Singapore deserves to be on this list. Not because it's exciting, but because its safety feels like a given. 8. Slovenia. Where safety isn't flashy, but quietly infused in every breath, Slovenia isn't a name you often hear in stories about Europe. It's not as loud as France, not as glamorous as Italy, and not as stern as Germany. But that very silence is its own kind of strength. Something that made me love Slovenia in a very personal way. Gentle, quiet, and full of trust. Here, safety doesn't need a media campaign, doesn't need to be turned into a slogan or movement. It's simply something you feel when you step off a train station, when you talk to locals, or when you sit alone by Lake Bled without needing to glance over your shoulder. I once drove through tiny mountain villages in Slovenia, where only a few hundred people lived. Endless vineyards, houses with no fences, and children playing in the streets without adults hovering behind. No honking, no shouting. Not because life here is perfect, but because people trust one another. And that trust has been woven through generations of slow, honest, community-driven living. Slovenia doesn't build its safety with technology or military budgets. It's built with manners, self-respect, and the simplicity in how people look at each other. Slovenia's crime rate is among the lowest in Europe, but that doesn't make the country cold or distant. On the contrary, locals here welcome tourists with surprising warmth. More than once, I was invited in for tea simply because I asked for directions. More than once, strangers helped me carry my luggage just because I looked confused. Kindness here doesn't come from a customer service smile, but from a nature shaped by a society that lives slowly, thinks deeply, and values one another. Safety in Slovenia isn't a wall to block danger. It's a heart that keeps people from doing harm. Traffic in Slovenia flows as smooth as silk. The train and bus systems run efficiently, and you can go from mountains to coastline in just a few hours. But what matters isn't the speed, it's the peace of mind. You know you'll arrive on time safely, without needing to be on alert. And if you love nature, Slovenia is a paradise not yet overrun. You can camp in the forest without fear of being bothered. You can hike across the country without worrying about theft. Everything operates on an old-school but effective logic. Mutual respect brings societal peace. Slovenia isn't for those who crave drama. It doesn't have the wow factor of Paris or Rome, but that's exactly why I find it worth living in. Safety here isn't loud, isn't showy, but it's present, steady, unshakable. It's like a quiet friend who doesn't talk much, but is always there when you need them. And sometimes, that's the most precious kind of friend. If you've ever lived in a city where coming home late means holding your breath, Slovenia will feel like a hug, wrapping you in complete trust, and that's something no other country can easily replicate. 7. Austria. Where safety is the result of order that's loved, not forced. Austria holds a quiet beauty, not loud or flashy, but deeply rooted in the hearts of anyone who's ever lived or traveled there. It's not the beauty of a country trying to look good, but one that comes from long-standing stability, the kind that lets you exhale after months of tension elsewhere. I remember my first time in Vienna. The city didn't overwhelm me with skyscrapers or bright lights, but with the calm in people's eyes, the unbelievable order of every corner, and a sense of safety so strong that you forget to be on guard. In Austria, safety doesn't come from fear of punishment. It comes from a civic spirit. Austrians follow rules not because they're forced to, but because they understand that's the foundation for everyone to live better together. From keeping public spaces clean, to not pushing in line, to waiting for the red light even when no cars are coming. It all creates a society that thinks ahead, thinks of others, and thinks about consequences. That's what builds an invisible fortress, where you don't need to look over your shoulder, where kids take the tram to school alone, where a random tourist is given directions like family. Austria has one of the top social welfare systems in Europe. From public health care to education, from elderly care to disability support, everything runs in a structured, effective, and fair way. This not only stabilizes society, but also significantly reduces the factors that lead to crime. Because a society with less injustice breeds less hatred. A society where people aren't pushed to the edge is one with fewer reasons to break the law. And Austria does this not through political speeches, but through daily practice, through centuries of building and preserving core principles. I once sat in a cafe in Salzburg on a drizzly afternoon, watching people pass by. Unhurried, unshoving, a wallet dropped, and within 5 seconds, someone behind had picked it up and called out to the owner. No one filmed it. No one posted it online as a heartwarming act of kindness, because to Austrians, that was just normal. And that normal is the extraordinary thing in a world where kindness feels increasingly rare. Austria isn't a place for chaos lovers. You won't find much spontaneity here, no exciting surprises from fast-paced living. But if you're tired of the noise, tired of always being on guard, then Austria is like a clean, cool stream. Not loud, not colorful, but enough to wash away everything toxic you've been breathing in. Safety in Austria isn't a fence, it's a culture, a system, a trust that's been planted over generations. And maybe that's the most lasting kind of safety. Not showy, not controlling, just something to maintain and pass on. If you're looking for a place to live slowly, deeply, and with trust, Austria is a worthy choice. Not because it's glamorous, but because it's as precise as a symphony without a single wrong note. 6. Switzerland. When safety is a byproduct of a perfect system, Switzerland needs no introduction. Even if you've never set foot there, you've probably heard about the precision of Swiss watches, the reliability of Swiss banks, and the astonishing cleanliness of its cities. But those are just surface-level details. What truly makes Switzerland one of the safest countries in the world isn't advertising. It's the operational quality of its entire social system. A system where everything, from transportation and healthcare to education, and how people treat one another, is designed with the same philosophy: efficiency, transparency, and respect for individual rights. I once pulled over on a rural Swiss road. No one around, pitch dark, only forest and mountains nearby. I stepped out to take a photo of the moon and didn't lock my car. For a split second I was startled, thinking this might be risky if I were in any other country. But in Switzerland, you learn to trust the community, trust the law, and more importantly, trust the strength of the system you're living in. The crime rate is low not because there are more police, but because people don't need to commit crimes to survive. High living standards, equal opportunities, and solid education. These reduce the root causes of dangerous behavior. The Swiss government isn't your supervisor. It's a manager of the system with cold-blooded professionalism. Laws are clear, major decisions are voted on directly by citizens, and the national budget is publicly detailed to the last digit. This transparency gives people a reason to trust, and when people trust, they don't feel the need to fight back. When you live in a society where your rights are protected, laws are applied fairly, and no one is above the law, you don't have to stay on guard all the time. You relax, and when you relax, you stop generating tension, and the entire society becomes more pleasant. It's a positive feedback loop that Switzerland has successfully maintained across generations. Of course, living here isn't cheap. A cup of coffee can cost as much as a meal elsewhere, but think of it this way. You're not paying for the coffee. You're paying for the peace of mind, not needing to hide your wallet deep in your pocket, not keeping your eyes glued to your backpack, not second-guessing whether you should take that alley at 10 p.m. You're paying for assurance, And in Switzerland, that assurance doesn't come from a feeling, but from a system that runs like a machine. I remember meeting an elderly German man who had lived in Switzerland for over 30 years. He said, "Here, I don't feel like I have to fight every day just to be respected. I just live, and everything around me automatically supports me in living decently." That might sound simple, but it captures the Swiss spirit. They don't force you to be good. They just create an environment where you wouldn't want to be anything else. Switzerland isn't flashy. They don't seek the spotlight. But in that quiet humility, they've preserved something priceless that modern people are losing every day. Safety that doesn't need to be explained, not because you're afraid, but because deep down, you know the system will function exactly as it should. And when a society functions properly, people naturally live properly. That's a model few countries can achieve. And it's why Switzerland deserves its place here, on a list of places where you can finally let your guard down and believe you don't have to keep defending yourself anymore. 5. Japan. When safety is the result of inner discipline and a culture of self-restraint. There is no place in the world like Japan. Here, everything runs on an unspoken order. No force, no threats, just a silent agreement among millions of people that this society stays peaceful only if every individual keeps themselves in check. Safety in Japan doesn't come from control. It comes from culture. A culture passed down through thousands of years, where tidiness shows not just in the streets, but in how people line up their shoes at the door, bow to one another, or keep silent in a crowded subway. It all gives you one overwhelming feeling. You're in a place where everyone understands their role and does it well. I once lived in Tokyo for a few months, and every day felt like a lesson in trust. No pushing, no yelling, no littering. One time I left a camera worth nearly $2,000 in a small cafe in Daikanyama. 2 hours later, I returned to find it exactly where I left it, with a small handwritten note in broken English. "Your camera is safe. Don't worry." I couldn't believe my eyes, and I didn't even know who to thank, because here, that's just normal. Japan makes you feel safe not because there are cameras everywhere, but because you know, if you drop something, the person who finds it will return it without a second thought. Japan's violent crime rate is among the lowest in the world, especially for foreigners and women. Children as young as 6 walk themselves to school without adult supervision. Train stations are packed, yet still quiet. Red light districts are separated and strictly managed, so they don't affect nearby residents. In Japan, safety is a part of life, not some luxury you have to fight for. And it comes from within. Japanese people are taught from a young age that they don't just live for themselves, but for the people around them. That said, safety in Japan isn't free. It comes with invisible social pressure, always maintaining proper behavior, never disturbing others, never showing too much emotion. This isn't the ideal place for extremely extroverted people or those who like to break the mold. But to me, Japan is the perfect place for healing, for quiet living, for listening to yourself, without worrying about the people around you. And if you've ever lived somewhere where every step needs to be calculated, every glance analyzed, then you'll understand how freeing it is to step outside and not be on alert. Japan doesn't build safety with laws. They build it with habits, with culture, with invisible mutual agreement. Here, you don't need to speak up to be respected. You don't need to boast to avoid being trampled. And you don't need to lock everything in a safe, because society has already locked away the usual risks for you. Japan may not be the most exciting place, but it's where your heartbeat can slow down, your mind can clear, and you feel that lightness of realizing this world still has a place where people aren't forced into a constant survival battle. And to me, that's the true definition of safety. Iceland, safety like a breath. You don't see it, but you always feel it. Iceland isn't the ideal country if you love bustling streets or flashy shopping malls, but if you've ever lost sleep over car horns, clutched your bag in public, or looked over your shoulder while walking home late, then Iceland feels like a deep, relieving sigh. This is a place where you don't need fences, because no one feels the urge to trespass, where you don't have to hide your wallet in an inner pocket, because very few people would want to take it, and where you can get lost in majestic nature without getting lost in a chaotic society. I once stood alone on a vast black plain at sunset in southern Iceland, wind whipping past my ears, a glacier drifting silently in the distance. No one around, no signal, no cell phone reception. But I wasn't afraid, because I knew nothing out there was waiting to harm me. It's a strange feeling, and a rare one, in a world where the fear of being hurt is the background noise to everything we do. Iceland has a population of under 400,000 people, but it's hard to find a place with such transparent justice, respectful police, and a crime rate this low. For years, Iceland has ranked at the top of the Global Peace Index, not just because they avoid wars, but because they don't even have a military. Police rarely draw their guns, because most of them don't carry one. And if a bank robbery does happen, it makes headlines for an entire year, because it's so rare. But what matters isn't just the lack of crime, it's the feeling you get living in a society where people aren't pushed to extremes, forced to choose the wrong path. In Iceland, the government provides healthcare, free education, mental health services, and full social support. Inequality is kept to a minimum, and people don't need to fight for survival in illegal ways. Put simply, Iceland is where the system removes most of the reasons people commit crimes. Instead of increasing punishments after they do, the community in Iceland is also tightly knit. Everyone knows each other, or at least knows someone who knows you. In small towns, people leave their doors open all day, only closing them when the snow piles up too high. Kids play outside unsupervised. Adults leave their cars running outside the store while they shop. This isn't naivety. It's a culture where trust still holds value. Of course, Iceland isn't for everyone. Life here is isolated. The climate is harsh, winters are long, and costs are high. But to me, that's a fair price to pay for something priceless. Freedom from fear. You're not scared of being pickpocketed, not worried your child will be abducted, not afraid of getting stabbed down a wrong alley. Your only real concern is whether the weather will cooperate so you can see the northern lights. And when a society makes you fear nature more than people, that's a rare place where our instinct for goodness is still intact. Iceland doesn't build fences to keep people safe. They build trust. They don't use weapons to prevent harm. They use kindness and transparency to stop it from happening in the first place. And to me, that's not just safety. That's civilization at its highest form. A place where no one has to become a victim or a perpetrator. All you need to do is be human in the truest sense. 3. Denmark. When safety begins with trust in the system and mutual respect, Denmark doesn't impress you at first glance. It doesn't show off its beauty with massive old buildings or grand squares. But live here for just a week, and you'll notice something deeper. The quiet beauty of a society that doesn't need defenses. A place where people live without suspicion, without barriers, without guarded eyes. In Copenhagen, I once sat in a park all afternoon, laptop open on a bench, headphones in, mind wandering, and no one cared. No one watched, no one approached, no sense of threat. And by the end of that day, I realized I had just experienced 4 hours of complete freedom, something that in many places you have to fight hard to get. Denmark might be one of the rare examples in the world where, when the government does its job right, citizens don't need to doubt, and crime has no reason to exist. The government here is almost absolutely transparent. Public spending, welfare policies, the healthcare system, all are overseen by the people through a strong democracy. Citizens trust the system not because they're persuaded, but because generations have proven it works. And when you trust the system, you don't have to question every stranger walking past you. What's amazing in Denmark is this. Freedom and safety exist together, without conflict. You can be anyone. An introvert who loves silence, a same-sex couple holding hands, a foreigner from a place no one's heard of, and still be respected. No one cares who you are as long as you don't harm others. This society doesn't pressure you to blend in, because they understand. When you can be yourself, you're more likely to live kindly. Denmark's crime rate is very low, especially violent crime. Serious incidents are handled quickly and transparently. The justice system doesn't go soft on dangerous behavior, but it also doesn't treat offenders inhumanely. This is a place where justice isn't symbolized by swords, but by rulers, precise, fair, and equal. That's why people here rarely feel the need to arm themselves for protection, because they know if something happens, the system will stand with them, without needing a media circus or public outrage. But what I love most about Denmark isn't the laws or the politics. It's the attitude toward life, an attitude that's unshowy, not bitter, not cynical. Danes don't shove you off the road to go first. They don't honk just because you took one extra second to start your car. They don't glare at you for being different. And do you know why? Because they're not afraid of you. They don't doubt you. They have no reason to believe you'll hurt them, and in turn, you don't feel the need to put up walls to protect yourself. Denmark isn't paradise, no place is. But this is a society where fear isn't the engine behind action, and that's what creates a kind of enduring safety. Not because they fight evil hard, but because they've removed most of what causes it. And that, to me, is a greater victory than any war. The triumph over human suspicion. Denmark achieved that, not through propaganda, not through control, but through real civilization. True civilization. ChatGPT said too, New Zealand. When safety is a spiritual heritage preserved within wild nature, New Zealand doesn't shout to prove that it's safe. They don't use slogans, don't build walls, and don't need a massive security force to create a sense of peace. They let nature do that job. Because when you stand before a cloud-filled valley, sit still in a primeval forest, or kayak down a turquoise river with no one else in sight, you understand. This is not a place where people were meant to distrust each other. It makes you believe again, not just in others, but in your own inherent goodness. A part of you the modern world erodes every day. I once lived near Queenstown for a short time. Morning walks to the lake, afternoon bike rides around the hills, evening tea under the stars, doors left unlocked, belongings outside on the porch, car parked without steering lock, and no one touched a thing. Strangers greeted each other, smiled gently, and were ready to help when you hesitated on the trail. It wasn't that fake tourist friendliness, but a kind of natural goodwill nurtured in a society not threatened by its own people. And to me, that's the highest definition of safety. When humans aren't a threat to one another, New Zealand has one of the lowest crime rates in the developed world, especially in rural areas and the South Island. There aren't many police officers, but they're effective. The legal system is transparent, responsive, and focuses heavily on prevention rather than punishment. Offenders here are often offered rehabilitation programs, therapy, and real reintegration opportunities. Because people believe a healthy society isn't one without mistakes, but one that knows how to heal them. Unlike many wealthy European countries, New Zealand doesn't buy safety with prosperity. They cultivate it through social consensus, small population, a government close to its people, non-toxic media, and trust that hasn't been eroded. Citizens take part in decisions affecting their communities, from opening schools to protecting national forests. And the government, instead of commanding, listens. So safety doesn't come from coercion, but from the sense that you're not left behind. You're not pushed into cutthroat competition where backstabbing becomes a survival skill. That's a spiritual foundation very few countries still maintain. Of course, New Zealand isn't perfect. There's still inequality, racial tensions, and occasionally a serious incident that shakes the nation. But what the world should learn is how this community responds, with calm, unity, and clarity. This isn't a society without pain, but one that heals by growing closer, not by building more barriers. New Zealand is a place where you live among nature without fearing nature, live among people without fearing people, and live with yourself without putting up walls. It's a place where you can loosen your shoulders, breathe more slowly, and realize safety isn't about no one hurting you. It's about not even thinking that they might. And to me, New Zealand isn't just safe. It's an antidote for souls tired of suspicion and conflict. A place where you can simply live, truly live, with no armor. 1. Portugal. Safety isn't just a feeling. It's a way of life embedded in every breath. Portugal doesn't top this list because of a giant defense budget or high-tech surveillance systems. They top it because they chose a way of living the rest of the world seems to have forgotten. Gentleness. A short word, but one that's harder to practice than any harsh law. I used to think gentleness was weakness, A disadvantage, something unfit for this fiercely competitive world. Until I lived in Lisbon for a month, no one rushed, no one shoved, no one turned their gaze into a weapon against strangers. Portugal is the kind of place where you can walk alone through cobblestone alleyways late at night, golden lights glowing from little wine bars, and not feel afraid of anything. Not because there's police on every corner, but because no one intends to hurt you. That peace doesn't come from a system. It comes from people, from kindness that asks for nothing, from gentle eyes and soft bom dia greetings at the morning market. You might call it culture. I call it a form of moral living, a kind of ethics the modern world has traded away for speed and convenience. Portugal has held the lowest crime rate in Europe for years, especially for tourists and foreigners. This isn't the richest country, but it's where many choose to live. Not because they're chasing economic opportunity, but because they want peace. They want to drink their morning coffee without worrying their scooter will be stolen. Let their kids play in the street without fearing abduction. Grow old in a place where neighbors don't yell over barking dogs, but come over kindly and offer a glass of sweet wine. I once asked an old man in Porto in his 70s why he never moved to London where his children live. He smiled softly, took a sip of espresso, and said, "Because I sleep well here." A simple answer, but it said everything. Safety isn't in statistics, it's in the quality of your sleep. And the Portuguese, perhaps, understand that better than anyone. What makes Portugal special is that they don't try to look safe. They don't use tourism ads to paint a fake, peaceful image. There are no viral videos showcasing staged serenity. It all comes from humility, from a culture of slowness and mutual respect, a warm Mediterranean climate, healthy food, a non-rushed lifestyle, and a strong sense of community. All of it creates an ecosystem where even people who've lived in fear begin to feel healed. Safety in Portugal isn't a luxury product. It's not reserved for the wealthy or those with powerful passports. It radiates from shopkeepers to public employees, from taxi drivers to the elderly fish seller at the market. Everyone carries the same message. Here, you don't have to worry. And when a society can say that without having to declare it, just by living it, then they deserve to be called the safest country in the world. I've been to many places and experienced many types of safety. Safety through law, through technology, through military force, through control. But Portugal taught me a different kind of safety, the kind that comes from living in a society that doesn't nurture evil. And if I had to choose where to spend the rest of my life, I wouldn't choose the place that makes me feel strong. I'd choose the place where I no longer need to be strong. That's Portugal. True safety doesn't come from force, but from civilization. You've walked with me to the end of this journey, through Switzerland's snowy peaks, New Zealand's wild forests, Kyoto's quiet streets, and Lisbon's sunny shores. And if you've noticed, there's one clear thing these countries share. The safest places in the world are not necessarily the richest, nor the most militarily powerful. They're the ones that place people, not GDP, at the center. Safety isn't about building more cameras, hiring more police, or handing out harsher penalties. True safety exists when society has no reason to do harm. When trust is the default, not the exception. When you step outside without preparing for if something happens. When you know, deep within the system, there's a community that knows how to live together, without hurting each other. And let me be clear, no country is perfect. Even in this list, there are still inequalities, social pressures, hidden injustices, or dark corners that can't be avoided. But the difference is, these nations don't ignore problems. They face them, improve them, and do it with collective kindness, a type of wealth that can't be bought with any budget. For me, looking back at these 10 countries, I don't just see travel destinations. I see models of how we can live. You might not move to Iceland or Slovenia, but you can bring their calm into how you drive each morning. You might not live in New Zealand's wilderness, but you can let your voice carry the softness of its people. You might not be a citizen of Japan, but you can choose to act with civility, even when no one's watching. Safety doesn't begin with a nation. It starts with you, with choosing kindness, even when others don't, with pausing instead of pushing, with saying thank you, staying quiet in public, picking up something someone dropped. And when enough people do that, society gets better, even without a single law demanding it. So I won't end this video with just a list. I'll end with an invitation. Be the citizen of the safe country you wish to live in, wherever you are, even in chaos. Be the seed of peace, through your actions, your words, and how you see others. If this video made you reflect, share it with someone you believe can make a difference, and leave a comment. Which country on this list makes you want to move the most? Or where have you lived that made you feel truly safe? Thank you for listening. We'll meet again, somewhere calmer, brighter. But remember, peace is not a destination. It's the way you walk. See you again.